Hey, it's TDA, and today, because several of you specifically asked for this, I'm going to show you exactly how to design your own awesome Dyson Sphere. That means that this will be a short episode which will basically serve as an addendum to the previous episode, in which I showed you exactly how to produce massive amounts of rockets and solar cells and how to make use of them. If you missed that one, don't forget to check it out as well. Now I'm going to start out with just a blank slate system so I can show you everything from the start, and that allows me to give a shout out to some of our newest members of the channel. So Ryan Herschel, Timmy789100 and Luxan, thank you very much for becoming members of the channel. Your support is very much appreciated. So let me walk you through the actual interface before we start building so you know what you're looking at. First thing you want to do is probably press this button over here so you can stop the time in your game. It's a lot easier to design your Dyson Sphere if things aren't moving around. Then over here you will see the name of your system. Now if you have multiple spheres in different systems, you can actually use this as a drop down and select whatever Dyson Sphere you have in other systems as well. I'm currently in an empty game, so there's no other system showing up, but this will allow you to check on your Dyson spheres, even if you're on the other side of the universe, because at some point your sphere might be done building, you might want to add something to it. It's really annoying if you have to fly up and down the entire universe in order to do that, so make use of that once you have more than one. Then over here you can see the list of your Dyson swarms. The Dyson swarm are all those little solar cells that you shoot up in the air and that start floating around in one large swarm, hence the name. And as you can see, you can define multiple orbits for this, so you can actually have up to 20 different swarms in different angles with different colors. We'll get to that in a moment. And you can use that to make very interesting, nice looking designs if you want. You can actually allow them to be shown in the editor. You can turn this off if you don't want to look at all the different orbits and you kind of want to figure out what you're doing with the one you're designing. But most importantly, you can also turn them off in-game. And this is especially important if you're trying to kind of save your own performance, because with a lot of swarms and a lot of spheres flying around, it does put a heavy toll on your system, so turning them off will get you a little bit further before your PC melts. Then over here we have the Dyson shells, which are the parts of the sphere that are going to be built by your rockets, so not the cells but only the rockets. And again, you can add up to 10 different layers. Now, again, you have the option to show them in the editor and in the game, and especially the editor you want to turn off your layers every now and then, because it makes it very hard to see what you're doing if you have multiple layers going on. The same holds for the back structure. This makes it a lot easier to actually see what you're doing if you're building something in the forefront, because of course a sphere is around, so once you've built one half of it, you're going to design the other half while you're also looking at the back half. So yeah, just makes it a little easier to see what you're doing. And then hide your rocket models is not really something that's hugely impactful, but because you will see those rockets flying around and actually start populating your sphere, and turning these off will remove that, but it's not really a big thing. Then both of these have a button for a blueprint. So once you make a design that you really like, you can just copy and paste that to a different system. Makes it really convenient so you have to design the thing once. And then last but not least, we have some interesting information on the right hand side. So there's the name of the star once again, but then we have the star luminosity, and that is actually the strength of your star. In the starting system, it will typically be about 1.0, just like you have over here. But there's going to be stars that can go up as high as something like 2.4, 2.5. So typically there will be about 4 or 5 typically blue stars in your systems that will get a luminosity above 2.0, and that's going to mean you're actually getting twice as much power from that star as you would get with a similar identical Dyson Sphere in a starting system. So if you want to optimize the output of your Dyson Sphere, make it at a high luminosity star. However, I would definitely recommend just building a Dyson Sphere in your starting system as well, just because you're going to be spending a lot of time there, and it's just a lot of fun looking at a nice looking Dyson Sphere. So don't just optimize the fun out of the game, make sure you have something nice to look at as well while you're playing. The generation capacity hopefully speaks for itself, so this is the amount of power that your sphere is going to be generating. You can make a blueprint for an entire sphere, which is going to include both the orbits as well as the shell. And if you're playing on sandbox mode like I am currently now, just because I wanted to show you these buttons, you can actually just instantly build an entire Dyson Sphere. Kind of takes the challenge out of it, but it's there if you want it, if you're in sandbox mode. Then This information hopefully speaks for itself as well, but this is just the amount of solar cells that are flying around, the nodes in total. So this is the nodes that you're building with the rockets. And then you're going to be able to see how much power your swarm and shell are generating compared to how much power you're requesting. So the requested power comes from the ray receivers on your planets that are trying to draw energy from your Dyson Sphere. And of course, that's very easy to scale up because just a handful of ray receivers fully powered will draw a lot of power from your sphere. But you can see kind of the balance between the two. Typically, you want to make sure that you're at least drawing as much power as you're generating, because otherwise it's just going to waste. Now we have a couple of buttons here that you're not going to be using that much. Again, this is an Eternal Solar Cells button only for sandbox mode. Basically make sure that your solar cells will never die, but in normal circumstances you will have a graph showing here that will show you how long your existing solar cells have to live. I'll show you a demonstration for a more advanced, half partially built Dyson Sphere later on where you can see that. In the bottom over here, there is an optimized solar cells memory button, which basically allows you to kind of make sure there's no memory leaks going on with your solar cells. This is only something that can happen in a very late game, but you might want to press this button if you're having some optimization issues. But honestly, just hiding the Dyson Sphere is probably going to do a lot more for your performance. The removing of free solar cells means that sometimes you will have these random solar cells floating around that aren't actually part of your design. For example, because you removed a orbit from your design. But sometimes it also happens kind of randomly, not entirely sure why that is. This will just clean that up, so this is a very convenient button to have. And then if you're a maniac, you can also just destroy all your solar cells. I would not recommend doing that. Okay, enough talking. Let's actually design a Dyson Sphere. So let's start with a swarm. You can add an orbit just like that, and it will generate a random one for you, just in case you couldn't think of any yourself. Now, the orbit radius is going to determine how large your sphere is. Now, as you can see, it will turn red every now and then, at least if you have planets close to your sun. You cannot have your swarm moving through your planet for obvious reasons. Ideally, you would want at least one part of your Dyson Sphere, could be either the swarm or the sphere itself, larger than your planet, because then if you build a planet on top of, a ray receiver on top of that planet, it will always have contact with your Dyson Sphere. It will never be out of reach. So just 100% uptime guaranteed if you do it like that. So this is just a little trick. Honestly, it's not hugely important that you make use of that, because honestly, if you have a large enough Dyson Sphere and you don't build your collectors on the outer planets of your entire system, typically you will have a very high uptime anyway. So don't fuss about it too much if you don't like a large sphere. But if you want to optimize things, that's what you should be doing. So just put it at any size that you want. The inclination is going to determine the angle in which the solar cells are going to fly around. So the circle that you see moving now is the path that your solar cells are going to follow around the sun. Now, why is this important? Well, it's not hugely important how you turn this, but if you have multiple orbits, so let's add a new one to this as well. And we have these moving in different directions and things like that. You can basically say, okay, maybe I have one of them moving like this, then I have another one moving at a 90-degree angle like this. And then you can make really interesting, nice looking designs with different orbits moving in different directions. Speaking of directions, this is the inclination that they're moving around. If you turn them around, this means that they will also be kind of moving clockwise or counterclockwise. So this is one way to flip them around. If you flip them around like this, they will be moving in exactly the opposite direction than if you're moving them like this. Just something that you want to take into account if you also care about the motion of your solar cells. Once you've made your decision on your orbits, you can always just edit them later on. So you can click these gears over here, and then you can change all the settings that you initially changed to whatever you want. Now, this will mean that your solar cells will take a moment to actually fly to the correct orbit once they're already up in the air. So you can see your solar cells moving across your entire galaxy. If you start messing around with this, it's actually really fun to watch. But it will mess up your design a little bit if you do that, of course, so make sure that you take that into consideration. It's better to do it correctly the first time around. The solar cell color is something that was added a little later in the game, so some of you might not have seen this yet. It's a really interesting way. You can pick whatever color you want from the entire spectrum, and make your own rainbow set of orbits if you want, or something like that. You can actually get really creative with that. You don't need a Dyson Sphere to have something very nice looking, and you can do this really early in the game as well. Just make sure that you don't run out of things like silicon before you actually reach green science, because that's going to be a pain. Okay, and then we get to the real meat and potatoes of the Dyson shell itself. So you can add a layer to that, and it works exactly the same way as for the Dyson Sphere. Again, you will see that you can't put it too close to the planet orbits. You also cannot put it too close to existing layers of the Dyson Sphere itself, so that it might turn red sometimes more often once you're building multiple layers. Again, if you build it very large, you can always have direct contact with your sphere, but it will take you a very long time initially to build a very large Dyson Sphere. So if you like aesthetics as much as I do, I would recommend starting out with something that's a little bit smaller and more humble, basically, before you start building huge constructs. Especially if you're building something in the starting system, you're going to want to expand to a high luminosity star at some point anyway, so you might as well save your huge creations for that one. By that time you will also be producing a lot more things like solar cells, but especially rockets. So before you have a massive amount of rockets, just start out small. That's my recommendation, at least. You do you. Okay, so how do you actually do this? Well, first of all, you again design a size, a inclination. This is again going to determine the rotation of your Dyson Sphere. So even though you can make an entire sphere, the sphere itself will still be rotating, and this is going to determine how that is. So this is going to allow you to flip that around, etc., just like the Dyson swarms. But take that into consideration when you're building your layers, because it will impact the movement of the different layers compared to each other. So yeah, it impacts what you're looking at, basically. So you create one. Then there is a huge interface that pops up where you can really go nuts in terms of designing your sphere. So you can set this to different layouts, which can help you kind of figure out what type of design you want. I really like personally the default one like this, because this allows you to make easy circles. But yeah, if you want to go for with more complex design, this will really help you make sure that you have like an even looking symmetric design, if that's what you're going for. It basically helps you divide the ball into different parts. It kind of looks like a tennis ball like this. Anyway, pick whatever setting you like. Like I said, I like going for this one. And then you can either start placing individual nodes like this, which is really tedious, but this is one way you can do that. However, the faster way is to make the actual frames. Now you can have the geodesic frames or the graticule frames, and the easiest way to look at how these work is just putting them down and seeing it like this. So it's a little hard to tell, but these ones are actually going to be straight lines, and these one will curve along the edge of your Dyson Sphere. I really like using these. But there could be use cases for these as well. It's completely up to you what you like the looks of better. If you use this will actually connect the different nodes straight away, so you don't have to fill them up manually afterwards. Now there's different designs of these things. This is just going to determine how it looks. If you zoom in a little bit, you can see there's a different look between this part and this part. It doesn't do anything in terms of the actual production value of your sphere itself. It's just about how they present themselves in the game. So basically what you can do now is make a nice looking pattern across your Dyson Sphere. Maybe work something with triangles. That's kind of my go-to, honestly. But you can make all kinds of different interesting shapes. I'll show you a couple of examples near the end of this video. Now set this up in whatever way you want. Turn around the camera like this and stuff like that. Sometimes you have to kind of fight against the camera. It kind of gets stuck sometimes, in my opinion, but you should be able to just turn it around. And again, if you do it like this, for example, you say hide the back structures, it makes it a little easier to work in the foreground if you don't have to look at all the nodes in the background as well. So this is just a way to make your life easier, like I just said before. Then last but not least, in terms of actually designing the sphere itself, you can fill up these holes if you have, you can make them too big, but as long as they're sufficiently small, you can fill them up with solar cells. Now, all of these different designs are, again, just aesthetics. So you can pick whichever one you want, and then just fill these in and have the Dyson swarms populate them accordingly. It's a little hard to tell that they're actually different, but if you zoom in closer, you can see these are kind of the rectangular ones. These are triangles and stuff like that. So this will, again, just impact the visuals, but putting these areas in here, kind of painting these in, is super important, because this is, again, where your Dyson swarms are going to fill up in, and that will make them permanent. If you don't do this, you're just going to have an empty frame, and you're going to waste all your solar cells. So make sure that you fill at least a couple of these frames up. You don't need to fill all of them up. You can actually leave gaps in your Dyson Sphere as well. Looks really nice. It's not necessarily functional, but aesthetics matter too. But make sure you don't forget about this. Now, the really fun part is that you can also give this colors. So you can pick, again, whatever color you want, and you can paint both the frames as well as the actual construct itself. So you could make that in a completely different color and paint it like this. You can paint individual nodes. You can go completely nuts with this. You can make your own monstrosity in terms of colors. This is also where the blueprint function comes in, because if you make a design that you really, really like, then by all means copy and paste it to a new system as well, so you don't have to do it all over again. Now, of course, there's also kind of a painting mode. That is this one, where you can go even more nuts. Again, use this in whatever way you want. You can actually increase the brush size. So if you have a very large area of your Dyson Sphere, you just want to paint in one color, you can do that like this. The nodes sometimes need a little bit of special attention. Makes it really easy. And now you might be wondering, like, this doesn't look anything like the sphere I just designed. That's correct. But it will only apply this color to the parts of the sphere that actually exist. So this is just an easy way to fill in a large area, but it's not something you would typically use if you want to make a more detailed, smaller design. Now, of course, you can also highlight this, so this is even worse. You can make it in like neon colors. Really nice and shiny and bright, kind of hurts your eyes, but it makes your sphere stand out a lot in the darkness of space. So use this at your own discretion. But it's nice to know that this is here, so this really brightens up your sphere. And then last but not least, of course, you can also remove all of this. You're like, nope, 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 this is not what I wanted. And you can do it like this. And you can actually see that the underlying colors show back up. So this is an easy way to get rid of the huge painting thing that I just did. And here is just a couple of examples of my own spheres to give you some inspiration, or at least some idea how this will actually work. So what I've done over here is just have a couple of different orbits, 5 in total, which are all at the exact same radius from the star, but all at a different inclination. And by basically spacing them out at equal distances, you get a very nice looking kind of a sphere already. Just give them all a different color and make your own rainbow. So very simple, but sometimes simple is very effective. Then in the middle over here, I actually have one of my first spheres ever, I think, that I designed over here. As you can see, I went a little bit creative with leaving some open space. So there's a circle on the top, and there's kind of a row around that. And there's kind of zigzag going on in the middle over here. These areas have absorbed a lot of solar cells, so this is actually going to be generating a lot more power. As you can see over here, the Dyson Swarm, even though there's tens of thousands of solar cells in there, the Dyson shell itself is actually generating far more power. And this is kind of the core of my shell. Now, to make it a little bit more interesting, I added another layer to this, and I'll show it in the editor now. It's almost empty, but it's just mostly meant to make things look more interesting. It's also a very large shell, so what this does is make sure that there is a point of contact for my other planets around, to make it really easy to connect to the power production of the shell. You can imagine that if I filled this up completely, there will be I don't know, a million, but at least a lot and a huge amount of solar cells going into a huge sphere like this. So yeah, That's a very ambitious project if you start it, but if you actually want to see it completed in your lifetime, I would recommend keeping it a little bit smaller. But you can do whatever you want. This is just a random design, so let me show you another one. And here you go, another design that I really like actually. It's kind of a flower design with all the different colors on top, kind of spreading out as we go downwards. Then we have this hugely bright solar storm over here in the middle. This looks very zen. I don't know, it makes me very calm just looking at it. And as you can see, you don't need to make it complicated. You also don't need to make a hugely complicated large sphere in order to generate a lot of power, because as you can see, this one is already generating almost 22 gigawatts of energy. So that's a huge amount. And this is partially helped by the fact that this is on a star that has a higher luminosity, so 1.6. Definitely not the highest you can get, but it's pretty decent. And as you can see, we're generating quite a bit of power just from a very simple sphere like this. Now, this might be obvious, but you don't actually need to use Dyson swarms. You can actually use just a Dyson shell, which is what I'm doing here. I just have these empty frames floating around. And because they're all moving in different directions, because they're on different shells, it actually makes the design look pretty interesting. Now, of course, this is never going to generate as much energy than if you make a more full design with solar cells included. But as you can see, even though this is far from completed, it's already generating 324 megawatts. So you can see that with just shells and nodes, you can actually get very far. And if you make a dense node shell, so basically put as many nodes as you can, as close together as you can, that's actually kind of the optimal way in terms of late game optimization of your shell, in terms of the memory consumption, CPU consumption versus the output. So if you really want to min-max your gameplay, you want to build a dense sphere with just shell. Now, I've mentioned this before, but I do want to repeat it again. I would recommend that you start out with a small portion of your sphere. Make sure you have that completed. So you can see I started out with this area over here initially, and then expand from that point onward. So what I've done over here, for example, is build this first, then added this large circle to that. Now, I started with a pretty ambitious project, as you can see. But it's important to note that it's not efficient to actually start building too much things at the same time, because these areas will only start filling up as soon as there's enough nodes completed. And if you have these rockets flying all over the place to different parts of your cells, it's actually going to take longer for these areas to start being completed and be filled up. So you're actually decreasing the optimization of your sphere. On top of that, you're going to be stuck with a sphere that has all kinds of gaps and partially completed areas, while if you at least have a part of it completed, it looks a lot better. So again, aesthetics matter too. Now you can see that plan in action in the actual Dyson Sphere we're building in the current Masterclass playthrough. As you can see, I started with this inner layer, then I made an outer one across that. There is actually a swarm hiding in the inner circle over here as well. And now I started on the third layer. And if you look at that from real life, it looks a lot better than it does in the designer, because honestly it looks kind of bland in the designer, but this is the exact same sphere that I just showed you, and as it is floating around my current system. As you can see, it's being built pretty rapidly. It's still under construction. There's a couple of parts missing apparently, so I'm not entirely sure what's going on here with this second layer. There's a part missing. Hopefully the rockets will arrive soon to fix that. And as you can see, even without using any colors, you can make an awesome looking Dyson Sphere. It also really helps to kind of fine-tune the colors of your Dyson Sphere based on the color of the star you're building around. Building a Dyson Sphere across a neutron star is going to be a lot different than building it at a default blue or yellow star, so keep that in mind as well. Playing around with colors of your solar cells and so on, you can have so much fun with this. And it's really fun seeing it all come together as you're playing. I really hope this was useful to all of you. It's not that short of an episode actually. And for those of you that were already familiar with the UI, don't worry, there is a lot more interesting stuff coming up in the next episode as well. But if you found this useful, make sure you give it a like, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.